Most bands are run like a democracy. Everybody votes on, things like which songs to play, when are we going to practice, who's going to be in the band, who's going to, all the major decisions, what kind of gigs we're going to play. But there might come a time when you can actually put together a band where basically it's a dictatorship. You're in charge. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not an evil dictatorship. I'm using that word a little jokingly, but basically what that means is it's your business. It's your band. Here's what you're not going to be able to do. You won't be able to take your existing band where you were a democracy, you're all friends and everybody's equals in the decision-making process. You're not going to be able to convert that band into something where you're in charge. That's not what I mean. Really what I mean is putting together a new band where basically it's your band and you are hiring the other musicians, and that is possible to do. And let me explain how you can do that. There's a lot of musicians who might have their main band, but maybe that band isn't playing all the time, and they, maybe one member, maybe let's say a drummer who plays in a band who wants to get more gigs. Maybe his main band doesn't play as much as he'd like, so he makes himself available as just sort of a sit-in drummer for other bands. And in a case like that, he's basically just a hired gun. They'll pay, he'll just play for $100 a gig or something like that, just to make some extra money on, on a night where his main band's not playing. That happens a lot. These are, freelance musicians. There's other musicians who aren't in any band permanently at all. They just go out there freelance and just sit in with different bands, and that's how they make their money. So what that means is you could put together a band where it's basically your band and all the other musicians are just freelance musicians that you hire for those gigs. Now, that can get a little complicated because you have to know a lot of musicians, and you have to be able to make sure that they are dependable and they're solid. But it is possible to do that, especially with freelance musicians. Typically, that's what they do. Is they know a lot of the songs that you're probably going to be playing. Because a lot of bands, there's a lot of overlap in the song list. That is a reality. So those freelance musicians, they know all those songs. But also, you basically can hand a freelance musician your song list and say, here's what we do, and he'll go learn those songs. So if he's a drummer, even if he sees a bunch of songs he's never played before, he can go listen to the original recordings, he can get a feel for it. And yes, you'll still have rehearsals with those musicians. And we're not, sometimes freelance musicians will just show up and just play the gig and just kind of fake it through. That's one thing. But you could actually put together a band where you have rehearsals and you bring in basically hired guns to play with your band. And you just make it clear that that is the arrangement. It's basically your band and you're hiring this person to learn these songs, and so that you'll get out and play gigs, and that will be the structure of the band. Now, in order to do that, to be the leader of the band, you have to be the leader, which means not just barking out commands, because that's not what you do. What it really is you have to garner a certain amount of respect among other musicians before you can do something like that. You have to be really talented yourself, and not just saying that you're talented, not just going around with an attitude, but you have to be demonstrably talented, which means, these other musicians have probably seen you in a band before. They know that you're good, or at the very least, when you do get together in a rehearsal room, they can see that, hey, this guy really is talented. This guy does know what he's doing. And, I do want to play in a band with this guy. And that's really what you're going for, is you have to be in a position where other musicians, they want to play with you because you're that good or that talented, or at least that solid. And being a solid musician is really important. And you got to be friendly too. You can't be a jerk. Nobody's going to want to be in a band with you if you're a jerk. So when I use the word dictator, obviously I'm joking around, but basically you can be a band leader. Let's put it that way. And it can basically be your band. It's your business, and like I said, you're hiring musicians. Now, this is going to work best if it's the lead singer. If you're the lead singer, then you're probably also sort of the face of the band, which means you have the most direct connection to the audience. The audience identifies you. This is the face that I recognize as this band, whereas the other musicians could probably be replaced with others, and it would still seem like the same band, because that lead singer is the same, especially if the band is named after the lead singer. So as the leader of the band, you're also going to have to book all the gigs. You're going to have to learn how to do that. You're going to have the contacts with all the various venues and be able to get the band booked in there. It's not going to work too well if one of your hired hands is getting you booked, because then that hired hand's going to be like, well, this is my gig. Why aren't we equals? You have to be in a situation where essentially you're in charge of everything. You're handling all the important things. In addition to that, you're going to be the one collecting the money from the venue, from the manager, or from the owner. At the end of the night, when you get paid, when you get done playing, you're going to go get paid, and then you pay your hired musicians from whatever you get. Something else that you'll need to be in charge of is a PA system. You probably need to own your own PA system. It's not going to work too well if you're depending on one of your hired guns to bring a PA system. You need to have your own PA system. So book the gigs, collect the money, have a PA system. You got to be in charge of the song list. You got to be in charge of scheduling the rehearsals, finding a rehearsal space. You handle all of the logistics of the band, and that's what makes you the leader. Now, here are a couple of the challenges to doing something like this. In addition to, of course, all the headache that you have to go through of, finding the musicians and getting the rehearsals done and getting the venues booked and handling the song list and arranging all the songs and getting a PA system and all the things that you have to do. There's a couple things that can really make it difficult even after you've done all that. One of them is the limited revenue. When you're playing small venues, there's only just so much money to go around in the first place. If you are playing a typical average gig here in the Southeast, the band's getting paid $300 to $500. Well, there's not much money to go around anyway. So if if each musician, in this environment, each musician's probably not going to want to play for less than $100 anyway. So if you're only getting $300 and you got a 3-piece band, well, there's nothing left over. There's nothing extra for you to have. So, in a situation like that, why are you the one doing all the work, right? That doesn't make any sense. But if you can get the band booked at, say, $500 a gig and still pay your musicians $100 each, then you can make $300, and then it might be worth it to go through all that trouble. That's something that you have to weigh. But that can be a challenge, is deciding if there's not a lot of money involved in the first place, is it worth all the extra hassle that you would have to go through just to make a little bit more money? Now, where it really can pay off is if you're doing better paying gigs, not just bar gigs, but what if you're doing, let's say, weddings or private parties and stuff like that, where you can get the band booked at maybe $2,500 or $3,000, and then you could pay your hired musicians $200 or $300 a piece. That means you could personally go home with a couple $1,000s, and then it's worth it. And I've definitely seen bands do that. And I've actually freelanced and sat in with bands that have done that kind of thing before, and that's what the leader of the band was doing, is basically running the whole band himself, and then he would hire musicians to come in just to play at the event. But then he would go home with the lion's share of the money. So that's running it as a business. One other challenge is musician reliability. You've got to find musicians that take this seriously. They're professional, and it can be hard to do, because if they don't show up for a gig, if your drummer doesn't show up and you're on the hook for this gig, you're on the hook because you're the leader. And then what do? Now you find yourself scrambling around trying to find a drummer at the last minute. So it's best to have multiple musicians. You want to have probably your first tier musicians that you prefer to work with for most gigs, but also have a couple of backups. So if you've got a bass player and drummer that are your favorites that you want to play with, and I'm assuming that you're the guitar player and the lead singer, if you've got a couple of musicians that you normally would prefer to do the gigs with, make sure that you've got some others that are also ready. And maybe to keep them ready, maybe you want to rotate them out on a regular basis so that everybody, you have 2 or 3 drummers, and you kind of switch them out to play different gigs so that any one of them is ready to play a gig at any time. And the same with your bass players and other musicians if you have other musicians. Make sure you have backups for each one and rotate out those backups so that you get everybody involved. So it can be complicated being a band leader. There's a lot of work. You're doing the lion's share of the work. The reward might be that you could keep the lion's share of the money. It's up to you to decide whether or not it's worth it to do that. But that's basically how you can run your band like a dictatorship. So what I'd like to hear, have you ever played in a band like that, where maybe you were hired by someone to sit in their band and it was really their band and they just paid you a flat fee to be there and they kept the lion's share of the money? I know I've done that before. On the flip side, have you ever tried to run a band like that? It could be a challenge. I've done it before myself. But put some comments below. I'd like to get a little conversation going about this. And of course, hit the like button and the subscribe and the little bell and all the things you normally do on YouTube videos. And we'll see you next time.